Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. My name is Marlia Binti Dickson, a master student from Universiti Malaya. My topic for today is the relationship between social media platform, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, usage frequency, engagement, and English vocabulary learning among UNITA International University and University Malaya students. So today we will discussing on introduction, problem statement, research objective, key concept, theoretical foundations, review of past studies, research gaps, theoretical framework, conceptual framework, summary, and references. Social media has become an integral part of students' daily life, particularly among young adults and university learners. Platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube are no longer used solely for entertainment, but increasingly function as informal learning environments. These platforms provide learners with continuous exposure to English through videos, captions, comments, and repeated interaction outside traditional classrooms. As a result, there has been growing academic interest in the role of social media in second language development. However, while previous studies have examined general language skills such as speaking and motivation, English vocabulary learning remains underexplored, particularly in comparative studies across multiple platforms. This highlights the need for further investigation into how social media contributes specifically to vocabulary acquisition. Despite the widespread use of social media, its actual impact on English vocabulary learning remains unclear. First, most existing studies focus on single platform, especially on YouTube, with limited comparison across TikTok and Instagram. Since each platform differs in content format, interaction style, and algorithmic delivery, findings from single platform studies cannot be generalized. Second, usage frequency is often measured through self reported surveys, which may not accurately reflect learners' true exposure to English input. Third, learner engagement is insufficiently examined, particularly the distinction between passive engagement, such as scrolling, and active engagement, such as commenting or content creation. Finally, learner attitudes, engagement, and learning outcomes are rarely examined together. In Malaysia, existing studies are largely descriptive, limited to single institutions, and often focus on general language skills rather than vocabulary. Now let's move on to research objective. There are three. The first one is to examine the effectiveness of Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Second, to analyze the role of usage frequency and learner engagement. Third is to investigate English vocabulary learning outcomes. This objective guides the selection of variables and theoretical perspective in this study. To address the research objective, there are several key concepts that will be discussed, like social media as informal learning environment, English vocabulary learning, intentional versus incidental learning, and last but not least, usage frequency and exposure. Social media platforms function as informal learning environments where learners interact with authentic language in real life contexts. Unlike formal classrooms, social media provides contextualized and multimodal input through text, images, audio, and video. Learners also have autonomy to select content, control pace, and engage socially. Researchers argue that this autonomy encourages incidental vocabulary learning as learners acquire new words naturally while engaging with content for meaning rather than study. Vocabulary learning occurs through intentional and incidental process. Intentional learning involves deliberate study, while incidental learning occurs through exposure during meaning focused activities. Social media primarily supports incidental learning through repeated exposure to vocabulary in authentic contexts. Visual and auditory cues on platforms like Instagram and TikTok and also YouTube including images and subtitles, further enhance comprehension and vocabulary recall. Usage, frequency, and exposure. Frequent exposure to English input increases vocabulary recognition and consolidation when the content is meaningful. However, high frequency alone does not guarantee learning. Without comprehension or active engagement, vocabulary gains may be limited. Engagement has many components, including behavioral, which time spent on tasks and interactions, connective, which how deeply you think about something, and emotional, which interest in and motivation. It affects how well you learn online, and there is research that suggests that active engagement on social media, such as commenting, content creation, and intentional note taking, results in greater vocabulary enhancement compared to passive activities like viewing or scrolling. Learner engagement is therefore crucial. Active engagement, such as commenting, sharing, and or note taking, leads to stronger vocabulary gains than passive viewing. Learners' attitudes to social media for learning is influenced by their attitudes. People that have positive attitudes are often more involved and get better results. On the other hand, negative attitudes or that belief that something is not useful for learning make people less likely to use it. So, learners' attitudes influence how they engage. Positive attitudes increase motivations and engagement, while negative perceptions reduce meaningful learning. Now, let's talk about theoretical foundations. This study is guided by three main theories: connectivism, social constructivism, and Creation's input hypothesis. Firstly, connectivism by Siemens 2005 views learning as a process that occurs through networks of information, people, and digital technologies. In the context of social media, learners are continuously exposed to English vocabulary through algorithm driven recommendations, hashtags, subscriptions, and personalized content feeds. These features allow learners to build their own learning networks and receive ongoing vocabulary learning input beyond formal instruction. Secondly, social constructivism by Vygotsky, 1978. Based on Vygotsky's theory, emphasized learning through social interaction and collaboration. Social media platforms support this process by enabling learners to interact through comments, sharing posts, and providing feedback. Such interactive engagement allows learners to negotiate meaning and co construct knowledge, leading to deeper vocabulary understanding. Research indicates that learners who actively interact with content achieve better learning outcomes than those who only observe passively. The third theoretical foundation is Creation's input hypothesis, particularly the concept of comprehensible input, also known as I plus 1. According to this theory, language acquisition occurs when learners are exposed to input that is slightly above their current proficiency level but still understandable. Social media platforms provide this type of input through simplified language, short explanations, visuals, subtitles, and captions. For example, YouTube videos with captions or Instagram posts with images and short sentences make vocabulary easier to process and remember. These features reduce cognitive load and support vocabulary retention, especially in informal learning environments. In this session, I will discuss previous studies related to the use of different social media platforms for English vocabulary learning. Research on Instagram shows that its combination of images and short captions supports strong word meaning connections. Studies report improvements in vocabulary recognition and recall, particularly when learners engage with vocabulary focused pause or explanatory captions. However, most studies rely on survey data which limits causal conclusions. For TikTok, recent studies from 2023 to 2025 indicate that short forms videos increase learner engagement and support incidental vocabulary acquisition. The platform's microlearning format expose learners to frequently use vocabulary in authentic contexts. Nevertheless, the entertainment oriented nature of TikTok may distract learners unless content is supported by instructional guidance. In contrast, YouTube has been widely studied and consistently shows positive effects on vocabulary learning. Audiovisual input, captions, and repeated viewing opportunities enhance comprehensions and receptive vocabulary. YouTube also allows for more structured learning compared to shorter forms platforms. Beyond platform type, several learner related variables have been examined in past studies. First, regarding usage frequency, quantitative research generally shows a positive relationship between frequent exposure to second language input and vocabulary development. However, results vary depending on how frequency is measured. Studies that combine frequency with attention or engagement indicators tend to report stronger learning outcomes compared to those relying solely on self reported usage. Second, learner engagement emerged as a key factors in vocabulary learning. Research consistently indicates that active engagement, such as note taking, repetition, content creation, or interacting through comments and message, results in better vocabulary retention than passive viewing or scrolling. Guided activities outperform unstructured exposure. Finally, in terms of attitudes and perceived effectiveness, learners across various regions generally report positive perceptions of social media for English learning. They view it as motivating, accessible, and relevant. However, concerns remain regarding content accuracy, informal language use, and lack of quality control, which may limit its educational effectiveness. Next, we will look at research gaps. Recent studies increasingly recognize social media as an effective tool for second language acquisition, particularly in vocabulary development. Researchers have highlighted its potential to increase exposure to authentic language and learner motivation. However, despite these positive claims, the existing body of research remains fragmented. Many studies do not examine social media platforms, learner related variables, and learning outcomes in an integrated manner. As pointed out by Godwin Jones 2021 and Perez, etc. 2023, this lack of a comprehensive approach makes it difficult to draw firm conclusions about how and why social media supports vocabulary learning. This slide highlights the second major research gap. Many previous studies focus heavily on single platform, particularly YouTube. This is largely due to its audiovisual features and its widespread use in educational contexts, as shown in studies by Kabuha and Elias 2018 and Juliana 2024. While these studies provide valuable insights, they limit our understanding of how different social media platforms function as learning environments. Platforms such as Instagram and TikTok differ significantly from YouTube in terms of content length, interaction style, and algorithmic delivery. Due to the lack of comparative studies across platforms, it remains unclear whether vocabulary gains are platform specific or driven by general usage and interaction patterns, as noted by Jiang and Zhao 2025 and Aslan and Sirojidinova 2025. The third research gap relates to how social media usage is measured. Most studies rely on self reported data, typically collected through surveys where learners estimate how frequently they use social media to learn English. Although this method is common, it is prone to bias and may not accurately reflect learners' actual exposure to English input. Research reviews indicate that behavioral measures such as recording viewing time, interaction counts, or digital activity logs offer more reliable estimates of learning effects. However, such approaches remain underutilized in existing studies, as highlighted by Godwin Jones 2021, Song and Zion 2023, and Inayati 2024. This over reliance on self reported data weakens causal interpretations between usage frequency and vocabulary learning outcomes. Closely related to frequency is the issue of learner engagement. Many studies focus on how often learners use social media but pay limited attention to how learners engage with the content. Research on informal language learning suggests that passive exposure, such as scrolling or watching videos without focused attention, is not sufficient for vocabulary acquisition. Despite this, many studies fail to distinguish between passive and engagement. They also tend to overlook engagement as multi-dimensional construct that includes behavioral, cognitive, and emotional components. As noted by Hiver 2021 and Nayati 2024, this lack of conceptual clarity makes it difficult to fully explain how social media contributes to vocabulary learning. Previous research generally reports positive learner attitudes towards social media among university students who view it as motivating, accessible, and relevant to their daily lives. These findings are supported by studies such as Manogaran and Sulaiman 2022 and Ismail 2024. However, learner attitudes are often examined in isolation. There is limited research that explores how attitudes interact with usage frequency and engagement to influence vocabulary learning outcomes. As a result, the emotional and motivational dimensions of social media learning are not fully integrated into existing explanatory models. These research gaps are especially evident in Malaysia. Local studies indicate that Malaysian university students generally hold positive perceptions of social media for language learning. However, most studies are descriptive in nature, focus on a single institution, and examining general language skills rather than vocabulary as a specific outcome. Comparative research across multiple universities is rare, and factors such as institutional background, proficiency level, and socioeconomic differences remain underexplored. This limits the generalizability and depth of current findings, as highlighted by Kuram 2023 and Ahmad Siddiqui 2024. Given the limitations in existing research, there is a clear need for a more structured and comprehensive investigation into social media assist vocabulary learning. The present study responds to this need by inspecting multiple social media platforms, integrating usage frequency, learner engagement, and attitudes within a single conceptual framework, and focusing specifically on vocabulary learning outcomes. Importantly, it involves Malaysian university students from different institutions. By adopting this approach, the study aims to provide more concrete and reliable evidence on how social media supports second language vocabulary acquisitions and extend the current literature in a meaningful way. This brings us to theoretical framework. The combined approach of connectivism, social constructivism, and questions input hypothesis presents a comprehensive framework. Connectivism talks about internet usage and algorithm exposure. Social constructivism talks about learning through social interaction like comments and online content. Lastly, input theory talks about how important it is to have clear, repetitive input like captions and images for learning new words. Previous research shows that this integrated view is helpful for studying how people acquire internet language. These slides present the conceptual framework that guides the current study. The framework was developed based on existing theoretical perspective and empirical findings from previous research on social media supported second language acquisition. It proposed that English vocabulary learning among university students is influenced by several interrelated variables operating within an informal learning context. At the core of the framework are social media platforms, usage frequency, learner engagement, and learners' attitudes, all of which contribute to vocabulary acquisition outcomes. Rather than investigating these variables in isolation, the framework integrates them to explain how social media function as a vocabulary learning environment. Firstly, social media platforms, specifically Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, are treated as key independent variables. These platforms differ in content length, interaction styles, and algorithmic delivery. Previous studies suggest that such platform specific characteristics shape the type and quality of language input learners receive, which may result in different vocabulary learning outcomes. Therefore, the framework assumes that platform type plays a significant role in determining how learners are exposed to and interact with English vocabulary. Second, usage frequency is included as another independent variable to represent learners' level of exposure to English input through social media. Research indicates that frequent exposure can support vocabulary acquisition. However, frequency alone does not guarantee learning. The effectiveness of exposure depends largely on how learners engage with the content rather than how often they encounter it. To address this limitation, learner engagement is positioned as a mediating variable in the framework. Engagement is conceptualized as a multidimensional construct that includes behavioral, cognitive, and emotional involvement. The framework proposed that active engagement such as focused viewing, interaction with content, and content creation strengthens the relationship between social media usage and vocabulary learning. In other words, higher levels of engagement enhance the learning benefits of frequent social media use. In addition, learners' attitudes towards social media are included as an important effective component. Positive attitudes are believed to influence both usage frequency and engagement levels. Learners who perceive social media as useful and motivating are more likely to use it consistently and engage more deeply with language related content. As such, attitudes indirectly contribute to vocabulary acquisition by shaping learners' behaviors and engagement patterns. Finally, the dependent variable of the framework is vocabulary acquisition, which refers to measurable improvements in learners' vocabulary knowledge. The framework also acknowledged the presence of possible moderating factors such as institutional background or learner characteristic, which may influence the strength of the relationships among variables. Overall, this conceptual framework presents a structured and integrated model that aligns closely with the research objective and hypothesis of the study. It provides a clear basis for examining how different aspects of social media use interact to influence English vocabulary learning among Malaysian university students. In summary, existing research suggests that social media has strong potential to support English vocabulary learning through multimodal content, personalized exposure, and opportunities for interaction. These features allow learners to encounter language in meaningful and authentic ways beyond the formal classroom. However, previous studies have several limitations. Many focus on only one social media platform, use inconsistent definitions and measures of learner engagement, and rely heavily on self reported data. This issue makes it difficult to draw clear and reliable conclusions about how social media contributes to vocabulary acquisition. To address these gaps, the current studies adopts a more comprehensive approach. It compares these three used platforms: Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, examines usage frequency and learner engagement, and employs specific vocabulary outcome measures across two Malaysian higher education institutions. The study is guided by connectivism, social constructivism, and the input hypothesis, which together provide a clear theoretical foundation for understanding how learning occurs through social interaction, meaningful input, and from digital networks. This framework establishes a structured basis for the relationships examined and sets the direction for the analysis presented in the following chapters. That's all from me. Thank you for listening.